Welcome to our deep dive into Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We've got essays, historical context, and of course, the novel itself.
It never gets old, does it?
Nope.
Right.
Frankenstein is always relevant.
Especially today.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not just a horror story, right? It's like this reflection on technology and the anxieties we have about it.
And it's crazy how it all started with, like, an 18-year-old Mary Shelley.
18.
Yeah, just a
And
teenager.
it was a dare.
Oh, it goes
The Ghost Story Challenge, yeah. And it turned into this huge thing.
that we're still talking about centuries later.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does, especially with all the stuff happening today with AI and gene editing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like she was tapping into something fundamental about the human experience, you know? That fear of the unknown, the consequences of playing God.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. This young woman writing a story that's still relevant to our debates about science and ethics. It's even more impressive when you consider the people she was hanging out with. Lord Byron, her husband, Percy Shelley. These were major intellectuals grappling with the possibilities of science, both the good and the bad.
And the personal stuff, too. Mary Shelley had already lost a child, right?
Yeah, her first child, and that grief, that sense of loss, is all over the novel.
It's like she's exploring this idea of creation and loss,
Yeah.
of life's fragility through Victor and his creature.
Absolutely. So Frankenstein becomes more than just a science fiction story.
Yeah, it's personal, it's emotional.
It's a reflection of her own experiences, woven into this larger exploration of what it means to be human.
You keep bringing up Victor, and that's where the cautionary tale part comes in, right?
Exactly. He's this ambitious scientist obsessed with pushing the boundaries of life and death.
Doesn't that sound familiar? I mean, look at what we're doing today.
Totally. We're talking about extending lifespans, genetic engineering, AI, all these things driven by ambition, by this desire to overcome our limits.
Just like Victor.
Exactly, but Frankenstein asks us to consider the cost of that ambition, the potential consequences.
Right. Like, are we so focused on can we do it that we forget to ask, should we?
One of our sources calls it the technical sweetness of these advancements.
Technical sweetness. I like that.
It's this idea that we can get so caught up in the challenge, the brilliance of it all, that we lose sight of the ethical implications.
So it's not just about Victor making mistakes. It's about something more fundamental.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that human flaw in all of us, that drive that can lead to disastrous outcomes, even when we have good intentions.
That's really insightful. Okay, but what about the creature himself? Everyone calls him a monster, but he doesn't even have a name.
Right, and that's deliberate on Mary Shelley's part.
So why do you think she did that?
Well, it makes him the other, right? Something to be feared and rejected.
Makes sense.
But it also forces us to confront our own prejudices, you know?
Yeah.
What makes someone or something monstrous? Is it just looks or is it something deeper?
Okay, so in the beginning, he's not evil.
Not at all. He's more like a blank slate.
He's capable of learning.
And compassion, even.
Yeah. Remember he finds that book by Rousseau?
Emile, yeah. The one about the noble savage.
And he's like influenced by it?
It plants this idea that maybe the creature's not inherently bad.
But that society corrupts him.
Exactly. What if his monstrosity isn't inborn, but created by how he's treated?
It's like this nature versus nurture debate.
But what with a gothic twist?
It's so clever. He wants connection. He observes the DeLacy family.
Learning about language, emotions, relationships, all the things he's missing.
And for a while, it seems like he might actually find acceptance.
But then they see him and they freak out.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Total rejection just because of how he looks.
And that's what really sets him on the path to becoming the monster everyone fears.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. He's treated like a monster, so he becomes one.
And that's where we'll pick up next time on our deep dive into Frankenstein.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Frankenstein.
Okay, so last time we were talking about how the creature is rejected by the DeLacy family.
Yeah, it's a turning point for him.
Because up until then, he's been kind of innocent, right?
Yeah, he's been learning, observing, trying to figure out the world.
But that rejection, it just shatters him.
It really does. And it's important to remember what his journey is like after Victor abandons him.
Right, because he doesn't just become evil overnight.
No, it's a process.
He's driven by these basic needs: food, shelter, survival.
But also this deep loneliness.
Yeah, this longing for connection, which is something he sees in the DeLacy family.
He's fascinated by them, by their kindness and love for each other.
It's like he's seeing everything he wants but can never have.
He's like this mirror reflecting back our own need for belonging, for acceptance.
And you almost root for him, you know? You want him to find that connection.
Totally, especially when he starts learning language, understanding emotions.
He's actually making progress.
But then reality hits.
Yeah, his appearance terrifies everyone.
Yeah. Even the DeLacys, who had shown him some compassion.
It's a brutal reminder of how much appearances matter.
And how quickly fear can override compassion.
And that's when things start to go downhill for him.
Oh, rejection fuels his anger, his bitterness.
It's like his vicious cycle, right?
Exactly. He's deemed a monster because of how he looks, so he's treated like one, and that pushes him further down a dark path.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It really is, and it makes you think about how much of who we are is determined by nature versus nurture.
Oh, like how our experiences shape us.
Exactly.
Wow.
Is the creature inherently bad, or is he a product of his environment?
It's like those studies about how kids who are abused or neglected are more likely to have problems later on.
Yeah, it's not an excuse, but it shows how powerful those early experiences can be.
And Mary Shelley is tapping into these deep psychological truths.
Centuries before we had the scientific language to describe them.
It's amazing, but why does he target Victor specifically?
Yeah.
I mean, society has rejected him.
That's where things get really interesting, because it's not just about revenge.
It's more complicated than that.
Yeah, he wants Victor to understand his suffering.
Like to feel what it's like to be alone and rejected.
And he demands that Victor create a female companion for him.
Someone who can share his burden.
It's a desperate plea for connection for someone who truly sees him.
It makes you think about how essential companionship is to our well-being.
Absolutely. And it puts Victor in a tough spot.
Because now he has to choose between potentially creating another monster.
Or letting his creation suffer in isolation.
It's a moral dilemma with huge stakes.
And it highlights that multi-layered responsibility we talked about.
Victor's choices have these ripple effects, impacting everyone around him.
He can't just wash his hands of it all.
But fear wins out, right? He destroys the female creature.
And that's a huge turning point because the creature sees it.
And he vows revenge.
It's chilling because you know it's going to get worse.
Yeah, it's like the creature is mirroring the cruelty he's experienced.
Turning Victor's own world against him.
And Victor is trapped because he knows the truth but can't reveal it.
The guilt, the fear, it just eats away at him.
He becomes obsessed with hunting the creature down.
But it's too late. The tragedy has already begun.
And it just escalates from there.
William, Victor's brother, is murdered.
And Justine, the innocent servant, is framed.
It's a devastating chain of events, and Victor is powerless to stop it.
He's living a nightmare.
Haunted by his own creation.
And then Elizabeth, his love, is killed on their wedding night.
It's the climax of all the choices and mistakes that have led to this point.
It's so tragic.
It's like this Greek tragedy, you know, fate, hubris, it all comes crashing down.
But even in death, Victor is still chasing the creature.
Consumed by this desire for revenge.
It's ironic, isn't it?
He's become a mirror image of the monster he created.
And that chase ultimately leads to Victor's own death.
Exhausted, heartbroken, he dies in the Arctic.
But there's a moment of redemption, right?
Yeah.
He warns Walton about ambition.
Urges him to choose compassion instead.
Yeah. It's like a last-minute plea to break the cycle of destruction.
But then the creature shows up.
On the ship.
Yeah, and he's not there to gloat.
Really?
He's mourning over Victor's body.
That doesn't make sense. He hated Victor.
It's complicated, you know.
What do you mean?
Well, he recognizes that Victor was the only one who truly understood him, in a way.
The only one who could have potentially given him what he craved.
Acceptance, connection, and now that possibility is gone.
It's like another layer of tragedy.
It really is, and it adds to that exploration of isolation and longing.
So what happens to the creature?
He decides to end his own life.
Really?
Yeah, he builds a funeral pyre and disappears into the wilderness.
It's a sad ending.
Tragic, but also kind of hopeful.
Hopeful. How?
Well, he makes a choice, you know? For the first time, he's not reacting to Victor or to society.
He's taking control of his own destiny.
Exactly. It's a moment of agency in this otherwise bleak story.
So Frankenstein is about more than just the dangers of science.
It's about choice, about the consequences of our actions.
And about the power of connection.
And how our choices impact not just ourselves, but everyone around us.
That's a pretty heavy message.
But it's one that's incredibly relevant today as we grapple with all these new technologies.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive.
We've followed the creature's journey, Victor's demise, and all the twists and turns in between.
But there's still more to explore, right?
Oh, yeah. Stay tuned as we delve into the legacy of Frankenstein and how it continues to shape our understanding of the world today.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Frankenstein. We've talked about the story, the characters, all that good stuff.
Now it's time to connect it to, well, us.
Yeah. Why does this book, written centuries ago, still matter today?
It's pretty amazing, actually. It's like Mary Shelley had this crystal ball.
What do you mean?
She was writing about things that are happening right now, like our anxieties about technology.
Oh, totally. We're surrounded by it. AI, gene editing, all these crazy advancements.
And it can feel unsettling, right? Like we're pushing the boundaries without always thinking about the consequences.
It's like that saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly. And that's what Frankenstein is all about, this cautionary tale about scientific ambition gone wrong.
It's not just about killer robots, though, is it?
No, it's about the subtle ways technology can change us, our values, our relationships, how we see the world.
It can be hard to keep up.
Yep.
Everything's moving so fast.
One of our sources, Heather Douglas, talks about the bitter aftertaste of technical sweetness.
Technical sweetness. I love that phrase.
It's like we get so seduced by the brilliance of a new invention that we don't see the potential downsides.
Oh, I get it. Like the Manhattan Project, right?
Yeah, the scientists were so focused on the challenge, the science of it all, that they didn't fully grasp the consequences.
Until it was too late.
Exactly, and we're facing similar challenges today with all these new technologies.
So what can we do? Do we just reject technology altogether?
I don't think that's realistic or even desirable.
Yeah, technology has brought so much good, too.
But we need to be more thoughtful, more critical.
How do we do that?
We need to ask the right questions. Who benefits from this? Who might be harmed? What are the ethical implications?
So it's about being aware of the potential consequences.
Exactly, and not just blindly embracing progress.
It's tough, though, right? Because technology is everywhere.
It is, and that's why it's a collective responsibility.
What do you mean?
It's not just on scientists or tech companies, it's on all of us.
As consumers, as citizens?
We have a role to play in shaping how technology is developed and used.
Okay, so it's about making conscious choices.
Absolutely, and demanding transparency from those in power.
So we're not just blindly following the next trend.
Exactly. We need to be active participants in shaping our technological future.
This is making me think about social media.
Oh, yeah, great example.
It can be great for connecting with people.
But it can also be used for spreading misinformation, for manipulating people.
It's like a double-edged sword.
It really is, and it highlights how technology is never neutral.
Yeah.
It's shaped by human choices, by the values of the people who create it and use it.
So we have to be mindful of those choices.
Another source, Cory Doctorow, talks about the adjacent possible.
Adjacent possible, what's that?
It's this idea that technology develops along predictable paths.
So like, the smartphone was bound to happen at some point.
Something like that, yeah.
But it's not just about inevitability.
All right, no, the key point is that we still have choices about how we use technology.
Oh?
We can use it to empower people to solve problems, or we can let it control us.
It's a lot of responsibility. It can feel overwhelming.
It's true, but Frankenstein reminds us that even small choices matter.
They can have ripple effects.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to be aware of the potential consequences.
So what are the key takeaways here? What can we learn from Frankenstein?
First, I think it's about cultivating ethical awareness, asking ourselves the tough questions about technology and its impact.
Not just getting caught up in the excitement of the new and shiny.
Second, it's remembering that technology is a tool, it's not a solution in itself.
We have to be responsible for how we use it.
And finally, I think it's about holding on to our humanity.
In a world that's increasingly tech-driven.
Remembering that we're more than just data points, that we have the capacity for compassion, for creativity, for connection.
It's a beautiful message.
And it's what will ultimately guide us towards a better future.
Well, this has been an incredible journey.
It really has.
We've covered so much ground, from the origins of Frankenstein to its lasting legacy.
And hopefully we have given our listeners some food for thought.
Something to ponder as they navigate this increasingly complex world.
Because Frankenstein isn't just a story, it's a mirror reflecting our own hopes and fears.
And it's a reminder that the choices we make today will shape the world of tomorrow.
So choose wisely, folks.
That's all for our deep dive into Frankenstein. Thank you for joining us.
Keep those brains buzzing.